Forget the castles, the glittering tournaments, and the shining armor of storybooks. Medieval Europe was no fairy tale. For women, it was a brutal stage where punishment was not only about pain, it was about control, humiliation, and making examples out of their bodies. Today, we're diving into the most grotesque and chilling punishments inflicted on women during the Middle Ages. This is not the sanitized version you saw in school. This is the raw truth. Let's begin with one of the most notorious devices, the scold's bridle. Picture a heavy iron cage clamped around your head with a flat piece of metal jammed into your mouth to pin down your tongue. The crime? Talking too much, nagging your husband, or criticizing authority. The punishment? Silence through iron. Some bridles even had bells attached, so the entire town could hear the clanging as the victim was paraded through the streets. It wasn't just punishment, it was theater, turning shame into entertainment. Next came the ducking stool, a chair attached to a wooden beam swung over rivers or ponds. The woman, often accused of gossiping, witchcraft, or being too outspoken, was strapped in and dunked again and again. If she drowned, she was declared innocent. If she survived, she was guilty and faced worse punishments. That was medieval logic, a no-win trial masked as justice. Its landlocked cousin, the cucking stool, didn't need water. Instead, the woman was wheeled through town while neighbors hurled insults, garbage, and sometimes stones. Often the ride ended at a dung heap, where she was dumped face first into filth. Her crime? The same old sins: disobedience, quarrels, defiance. For adultery, punishments could turn horrifyingly surgical. In many regions, women were mutilated, noses sliced off, ears cut, foreheads branded. Why? Because mutilation made the body itself a permanent criminal record. Your face became your mugshot. Husbands were sometimes allowed to carry out the punishment themselves, turning domestic disputes into legalized butchery. In some towns, women who strayed from their prescribed roles were forced to wear iron shoes, heated until red hot. Strapped in, they had to walk as crowds looked on. It was a literal walk of shame, each step branding the lesson into their flesh. You strayed from the path, now you'll burn upon it. Then there was the charivari, a ritualized mob shaming. Neighbors gathered outside a woman's home, clanging pots, pans, and drums. Sometimes she was dragged out for a mock parade through the streets. This was less about law and more about collective cruelty. The entire community turned into judge, jury, and executioner. Proof that in medieval Europe, humiliation was often a team sport. And of course, there were the witch trials. Women accused of witchcraft rarely went straight to the fire. First came the torture, thumbscrews crushed fingers joint by joint. The strappado, dislocated shoulders by hoisting victims into the air by their bound arms, then dropping them suddenly. Sharp instruments, burning irons, and forced confessions followed. When the burning finally came, it was public theater. Entire towns gathered as if for a festival. Vendors sold food. Parents brought children. A woman's death became a spectacle dressed as morality. Some punishments were less bloody, but equally destructive. Women accused of stepping outside gender roles were paraded through town dressed as men, wearing fake beards and hats. It was humiliation disguised as comedy, stripping away femininity while branding the victim as unnatural. Others were punished by being forced to swallow foul substances, spoiled food, filthy water, even animal excrement. This wasn't just physical torture, it was degradation of the soul. Imagine choking down garbage while your neighbors laughed. The wheel is often remembered as a tool of execution, but for women, it was sometimes used for humiliation instead. Bound to the spokes, women were left on display, spat on, pelted with refuse, mocked for hours. Their suffering wasn't hidden, it was showcased. Because women often prepared food, medieval society feared wives might secretly poison their husbands. The punishments for suspicion alone were gruesome. In German towns, women were boiled alive. In France, they might be forced to drink vile concoctions until collapse. In some regions, convicted women were sewn into sacks with snakes, cats, or dogs, then tossed into rivers, a death sentence wrapped in horror. Trials by ordeal became another twisted stage. Women accused of theft, adultery, or witchcraft might face the ordeal of water, tied hand and foot, thrown into a river. Float, and you were guilty. Sink, and you were innocent, but dead. The ordeal of hot iron was no kinder. Carrying a glowing iron bar for 9 paces. 3 days later, if the wounds healed cleanly, innocence. If they festered, guilt. Infection meant damnation. Stocks and pillories locked women in wooden frames for days at a time. Beforehand, their hair might be shaved, a devastating loss in a society where hair symbolized femininity. Dung, garbage, even stones rained down. Children mocked, neighbors jeered. It wasn't just pain, it was social death. Public whippings added another layer of cruelty. Women accused of prostitution or adultery were stripped to the waist and lashed in town squares. Sometimes salt was rubbed into the wounds to heal them, but more often simply to prolong agony. The pain was bad, but the public gaze was worse. Shaving a woman's head was itself a punishment, erasing beauty and status. Some were forced to wear crowns of straw or donkey ears to exaggerate the shame. Hair grows slowly. Every day until it returned was another day of public disgrace. Other punishments disguised themselves as religion. Women accused of adultery or dishonor would walk barefoot through town, wearing only a shift, carrying a candle, reciting prayers as neighbors watched. Some knelt at church doors for hours, confessing sins aloud as the entire congregation filed past. This was penitence turned into theater. For the gravest crimes, infanticide, treason, or heresy, punishments became rituals of annihilation. Burning alive was common, seen as a way to erase both body and memory. In Germany, women convicted of child murder were buried alive in barrels filled with spikes. In other towns, infanticide brought the horror of the sack, women sewn in with animals and thrown into rivers. And sometimes punishment didn't look like torture at first glance. In cases of sexual misconduct, women could be forced to marry their accuser or a man chosen by authorities. What looked like marriage was actually lifelong imprisonment in another form, binding women to men they never chose. Branding marked women permanently, burning letters or symbols into skin. An A for adulteress, marks for thieves or prostitutes. Exile followed, driven from home with no protection, no support, no future. In a medieval world, banishment was a slow-motion death sentence. In parts of Germany, gossiping women were forced to wear grotesque masks of iron shaped like pigs, donkeys, or demons. Some masks even had spikes that cut into the face. As the women staggered through the marketplace, the crowd laughed. It was cruelty disguised as carnival. Infanticide trials revealed the darkest rituals. Women were sometimes buried alive, surrounded by symbols of baptism, drowned in barrels, or executed in ways that blended punishment with distorted morality. A mother accused of failing in her sacred role was punished with the very elements of life itself. Even religious pilgrimages were twisted into punishments. Women accused of blasphemy might be ordered to crawl to shrines on their knees, bleeding across rocky ground, sometimes dragging chains or weights. What should have been holy became an ordeal of agony. In some regions, rebellious wives were paraded in bridal carts, decorated with ribbons